I think I'm probably going to ask you at the end of this introduction whether or not you would like Keir Starmer to be replaced by another, or W. Streeting, most obviously. And I'm a little bit surprised that I'm asking you that question. Not by events, dear boy, but simply by the calendar. I'm a little bit surprised that the size of the majority, albeit a wide but shallow, a loveless majority, as one excellent journalist called it. And of course the fact they haven't even been in the job for 2 years yet. But, this is a particularly febrile period of politics. So I also recognise that some people think that the conversation about Keir Starmer's leadership is evidence of things that they already believed to be true. And I don't like these mornings, or I don't like this bit of these mornings. I love political conversations about the unprovable, but I don't like the bit where I have to sort of patronise people who think that they understand things. So I can sort of use social media as a dipstick to get the level of confusion and often quite angry ignorance that's out there. And I know that will upset some people, but I'm sorry. It's just true that this is not a conversation about Keir Starmer's leadership that has been prompted by Rupert Murdoch, social media chatter, enemies of the Labour movement, or people who don't understand either the size of the majority or the scale of the successes that the current government has introduced. This is a conversation that has been started by Downing Street. I'm going to have to say that again, because it's not, any more frustrating than dealing with ignorance from the other side of the political divide. But there's something about leftish self-satisfaction that can be particularly impenetrable. I am right and I will not brook any opposition or any challenge to that position. This conversation about Keir Starmer's leadership and the fact that Wes Streeting is the perceived focus of the perceived challenge to his leadership is a direct consequence of number 10, somebody in number 10 Downing Street briefing very senior political journalists about how hard they are working to protect Keir Starmer from a leadership challenge. That is a matter of fact, not a matter of opinion, not a matter of legacy media, not a matter of social media chit-chat. It is a matter of fact. The story has its roots smack in the middle of Keir Starmer's Downing Street. That is why this story is in the news. So we can park immediately, and I probably shouldn't do this because, telling people not to ring into the programme is a very odd way of encouraging people to ring into the programme, but there is no point us picking over the carcass of a non-existent corpse. This is not a story about any of the things that self-appointed experts think it might be about. It's a story about Downing Street growing increasingly concerned over speculation among its own MPs that Wes Streeting could be planning an imminent coup against Starmer. And that is what they have briefed senior political journalists of. So, could you explain to me how his position could possibly be under threat with the majority? Yes, of course I can. It's because a majority is made up of people. It is made up of human beings. And those human beings have given Downing Street serious cause for concern that they're reaching the end of the road when it comes to their previously rock-solid support for Keir Starmer. And whether or not it is fair or unfair is a question for the angels. The point is, it is what is now believed, and therefore the conversation is now following the course that it is following. Forgive me if I sound a little petulant, but I find it a lot easier to deal with people who kind of know that they're stupid and love to pretend otherwise, rather than people who think that they're clever when they're not. So that is the story here. And it's important to understand that before we get stuck into the phone-in that we are now going to have in a much more friendly, warm and measured tone. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. Make me a list. Someone always does, actually. I think his name is Richard, and I'm very grateful to you, Richard, for the long list you send me every time we point out how unpopular Keir Starmer is, of all the things that Keir Starmer has done. But his unpopularity cannot be ignored. I think he is, by some measures, even more unpopular than Liz Truss, which is spectacularly unfair, but true. And it's the truth of it, of course, that will be concerning Labour MPs. wondering about the wisdom of him continuing in the job. The truth of the unpopularity, not the fairness of the unpopularity. Then you make the list. You point at things like the winter fuel misstep, which continues to haunt them. And here you can obviously acknowledge that missteps and mistakes made by a Labour government in our corrupt media ecosystem are going to be amplified and embellished and repeated in ways that mistakes made by right-wing politicians or Conservative governments are simply not. The idea that Keir Starmer stands in any way comparison with Boris Johnson, the corrupt, morally and, I suppose intellectually and even legally corrupt regime of Boris Johnson is a million miles away from where Keir Starmer is. And yes, the media is a magnifying glass that will hugely, hugely, hugely enlarge mistakes and missteps made by the Labour government while completely ignoring missteps made by Conservative governments. That too is a matter of fact and a matter of record. But it doesn't change the fact that his own MPs are profoundly worried about his performance in the top job. His own MPs will also, of course, be subject to corrupt media magnification, but it doesn't matter. His own MPs are increasingly of the view that they'll have a better chance of doing well, keeping their seats in the next general election, still a long way off, I grant you, with somebody else in charge. This is not an irretrievable situation. Again, I'm sorry, I'm sounding like a school teacher today, but sometimes even my boundless reservoirs of patience can be somewhat depleted. It is not irretrievable. It's some very strange places, from Goldman Sachs to the Daily Telegraph, have started pointing out that signs of recovery, economically speaking, are becoming unignorable, even as the job numbers must have sent a shiver down Rachel Reeves's spine yesterday. But this is not irretrievable. If the media persists in making everything in this country about small boats, then the challenge becomes harder. But if it actually remembers to look at other issues and measure other issues, the situation is not irretrievable. But I don't think Keir Starmer is going to change his spots anytime soon. So on one side of this issue, you have the political performance, the policy decisions, the failures to communicate, the things over which you have quite a lot of control and which is not currently being exercised very effectively. On the other side, you have him. And whether you like it or not, this is the nature of parliamentary politics. It's the nature of British politics. It's probably been the nature of politics since television was invented and Harold Wilson pretended that he smoked a pipe because it looked good on the telly, when actually in private that was not his tobacco ingestion means of choice. It matters. It really matters. And he's not going to change. Those of us who welcomed boredom, those of us who wanted relatively dull leadership, had another word attached to dull, even if we never said it out loud, and that word was competent. Dull competence. Please, God, for a period of dull competence. The lobby, Westminster journalists, political journalists, are addicted to drama and fever pitch coverage. It drives me potty some of the time. It really does. It's so draining and so unnecessary and so unreflective of reality. You know, the fine detail of Rachel Reeves's rental agreements with tenants that she'd never met being front page news for days. It's just a little bit sad. It's a bit childish. But sometimes the attention devoted to a story that appears to be a little bit manufactured is true. And it's real. This is a real story about the people around Keir Starmer being really worried about his position. And that is the starting point for our conversation this morning. The people around Keir Starmer are really worried about his position. They feel it is under genuine threat from Labour MP dissatisfaction. Now, Wes Streeting was probably telling the truth this morning when he distanced himself from all of this chatter, because what happens is that the level of dissatisfaction among MPs reaches a point that the current leader's position becomes fragile, And at that point, you start looking around for alternatives. And the top of the list at the moment for many people will be the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. The story suits him down to the ground as well in many ways, because he's about to make 15 or something thousand people in the NHS redundant, which is unlikely to go down well with the membership either, or with the parliamentary party either. But I don't think he is actually on manoeuvres. I just think his is the name that pops up on the fruit machine when Labour MPs, increasingly unhappy with Keir Starmer, pop 20p in the slot and pull the lever. All of that, I think, is pretty close to gospel. I think that is a pretty comprehensive, objective analysis of what is going on. And I'm sorry if you were subscribing to the idea that that having this conversation plays into the narrative of manipulation, because I'm not going to call you stupid. I'm just going to call you very mistaken today, and that's fine. I get paid to do this, you don't. That is what is going on. The people around Keir Starmer are very worried about the unpopularity he now enjoys among his own MPs, who would the next stage in this process, history has taught us, the next stage in this process would be to start gathering around somebody else, almost certainly, in the first instance, Wes Streeting. But remember, he who wields the dagger rarely wears the crown. So another reason why Wes Streeting is saying the things that he is saying today is that you don't want to be caught with the instrument of assassination in your hand. You may be a sort of, what the best way to play it is to do it through a reluctant sense of duty. My party has called and I must answer. If you're trying to make that position, my party has summoned me and I must answer their call with a stout heart and an honest approach. You don't want to have a metaphorically blood-soaked dagger hidden behind your back, which you've just removed from the back of your predecessor. So there it is as well. But none of this changes the central question, does it? A loveless landslide was the phrase, of course, not a loveless majority. Forgive me for that. I'm normally such a big fan of alliteration. I don't think... I mean, look, I always do this, and I think it works. If it gets on your nerves, again, I'm sorry. But there are two ways into it, isn't there? There's the personal, and then there's the overview. There's the little picture, and then there's the big picture. I think they're really hard to separate. I think the question I'm going to ask you today, and it's really crazy that we're asking it in before the middle of November 2025. Do you want Starmer to go?